Hey there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrew Clark, and in this video, I'm gonna be showing you how to improvise your very first guitar solo. Now, this lesson is gonna be perfect for those of you who have never improvised a solo in your entire life, or you're very new to improvising guitar solos, or you've learned through the blues method, which maybe feels a little bit restricting because you can only improvise over blues progressions. This is gonna be more of a way to improvise along to pop songs, country songs, rock songs, and other contemporary genres. It's important to note that about a year ago, I made 2 videos on this exact topic, and this video is gonna be very similar to those. I'm gonna be covering a lot of the same things. The problem is those were broken up into 2 different videos. I felt like I didn't really nail the flow of it that well, and I feel like I could do a much better job of that today. I've also restructured things a little bit as well so that you can tie them into things you've learned from my other videos, like the chord roadmaps or how to use triads and things like that. Now, before we get into things, if you've been enjoying these videos on my channel and you are not subscribed yet, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me out massively and it helps these videos get out in front of more people. Okay, so here we go. Section 1, the basics. So very important thing we need to do here is take a little bit of a crash course on music theory. So every single song that you listen to is in a key, and that key is where a song gets its melody and its chords from. Now, songs can modulate into other keys, but most modern pop music keeps it pretty simple. In Western music, there are 12 total notes that repeat as they go up or down an octave. Every time you complete an octave, you would be arriving back at the same letter that you started on. Now, if I were to play all 12 notes in a row, it wouldn't sound very musical. So a key consists of just 7 of these notes that follow a specific pattern starting on the note that shares the same name as the key. So if I played that pattern starting on an E note, which is my open E string, it would sound something like this. This is something you might recognize as solfege, so do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, or more commonly referred to as the major scale. And this major scale serves as the foundation for our key. So when we're in the key of E major, we will only be using notes from the E major scale. The same would go for any other key. If I were in the key of G major, I would be using the notes from the G major scale. So now we get into my 5-step system for improvising your first guitar solo. And if you've seen this video, you can go ahead and skip to section 2 because this is going to be stuff that we've already covered. So for step 1, we just need to learn a tiny little scale shape, and that scale is going to be a major scale. Specifically, because of the key of the song that we're going to use in our first example, it's going to be an E major scale. That shape is going to look like this. So now you need to take some time to get really comfortable with that scale shape. You should be able to play it forwards, backwards, fast, slow, nothing crazy speed-wise, but just comfortable enough that you're kind of not tripping over yourself. Once you got that down, you'll be ready for step 2. Now for this next step, we're gonna need a song to improvise our solo along to. So I like to use the song that I personally learned how to improvise along to way back years ago, and that's Slow Dancing in a Burning Room by John Mayer. So I can't use the original song in this video for obvious copyright reasons, but I have a jam track that essentially follows the exact same chord progression in the exact same key. So you can either download the jam track, I'll have it linked below for you, that I use in this video, or you can feel free to pull up the original song and play along to that. So all we're gonna do here is we're gonna pull up the song and we're just gonna play our scale shape along with the song. And because our scale and our song are in the same key, every single note is gonna sound like it fits. Now don't worry too much about how fast you're playing through it. The idea is to just be using your ears and paying attention to how those notes sit over the chords in the song. Now once you feel comfortable with this, we can move on to step 3, where we're going to start using our chord tones. Because the key of this song and the major scale we're using are the same, all the chords in this chord progression are just rearranging the notes that come from that major scale. So don't worry about memorizing all the names of all the notes in this scale quite yet, but basically what we're going to do is as each chord comes along, we're just going to play the note with the same name on top of each chord. So the chord progression that's being played here is a C sharp minor to an A major to an E major. And all we're going to do is we're going to find a C sharp, an A, and an E note inside of our scale. So these are the names of all the notes in our little scale. So we've got E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, then we got D sharp, and then we arrive back at an E. So it's an octave. Those are the same note right there. Now that means we've got our C sharp right there, then we've got our A right there, and then we've got our E either here or here. We can use either one. And as the track plays, I'm just going to play each one of these notes right on the chord change. So as if I'm playing the chord, but instead of playing the chord, I'm just playing that one note. And the chord changes in this song are pretty slow, so this should be pretty easy to follow along. Okay, so still nice and simple so far. Now, I just want to quickly address a common misconception that a lot of people have, and that's that essentially you need to play a different scale for every single chord that happens in a song. So if you were to play a C sharp minor chord, you need to play a C sharp minor scale. When you play an A major chord, you need to play an A major scale, and so on and so forth. But essentially, all you need to be doing is playing the scale that fits the key of the song. Now, obviously, there are so many ways to advance past that, but the core of it is really that simple. So for step number 4, we're going to be adding some random notes between our chord tones. And all we have to do there is as we play through these notes, so as we play our C sharp, our A, and our E, we're going to play any other random note from inside that little scale shape in between. So the idea would be to play your C sharp, and you can play a note there, then you play your A, then we can play that note, and then we're going to play your E, and then you're going to play another random note before going to your C sharp, and then back to the C sharp. It sounds a little weird out of context, but along to the track, it sounds like this. So repeat this as many times as you need to until you get really comfortable with it. And then once you feel ready, you can actually start adding maybe 2 notes in between the changes, maybe 3 if you're really feeling confident. The idea here is to just make sure you're hitting those chord tones as the chords come down. Specifically, we're playing the root notes of those chords, and then playing something else in the middle, and then coming back and landing on those chord tones. Okay, and for our final step, step 5, I'm gonna give you complete freedom. So what you're gonna do here is you're actually not gonna focus so much on hitting the chord tones. You can if you want to, but the idea is to just start playing around with different notes from the scale. And this might sound a little bit less musical than the step before, but the idea here is to really get your ear in tune with what is happening with the relationship between that scale and the chords that are happening in the background. And if you can do this, you are officially improvising. Now, it might not seem that fancy. It might not seem like this epic, cool guitar solo yet, but that's what we're gonna build into in our next section. So this is where we've hit our first checkpoint of the video. So for some of you, this might be as far as you're able to take it today, and that's perfectly okay. Like I said, bookmark this video, save it for later, whatever you gotta do, and come back here once you've kind of mastered section 1. Really spend some time with either the jam track or the original song, and just work on coming up with your own little riffs and licks using that tiny little scale shape. I know it might feel a little bit limiting, but if you put the time in, I promise the payoff is huge. Okay, onward to section 2, where we'll be expanding our tools. So what we'll do in this section is add some extra territory that you can cover on the fretboard. So rather than being constrained to that little major scale, you're gonna have a whole bunch more freedom. And the way we start that off is super simple. We look at the minor pentatonic scale. Now, most improvising lessons start here with this scale. I like to start with that little major scale first, get your foundations up, and then move into the minor pentatonic scale. But the great thing is it all just ties together. So if we go back to our little E major scale shape that we used in section 1, right on top of this scale, sitting right on top, is our basic minor pentatonic scale. So even though this is an E major scale, we can actually play this scale on top of it. And the reason why this works is because major and minor keys are essentially relative to one another. So every major key has a relative minor scale. I go into this in depth in my video about minor keys and also my video about modes. So I don't want to bog you down too much, but basically the idea is that the key of C sharp minor and the key of E major are the same thing. They have the same notes. So this song, Slow Dancing in a Burning Room, while it has all the notes from the key of E major, technically it's in the key of C sharp minor because it's got a very minory feel. But because those two keys are relative, they share the exact same notes, we can play a C sharp minor pentatonic scale right over top of our E major scale. And again, the reason for this is because they share notes. Now you'll notice our minor pentatonic scale is kind of missing some notes, right? Especially once we get up to that major scale spot. And that's because a pentatonic scale, penta means 5. So instead of our 7-note scale in a major scale, we have our pentatonic scale, which is going to take away 2 of those notes. So instead of having to play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, then arriving back at our 1, we actually remove 2 of the notes so that it becomes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then if we went back here, we'd be back on our octave like that. And the reason why people like to use the pentatonic scale is because our 4th note and our 7th note, the ones that get taken away from the major scale, are a little bit harder to fit over some of the chords in a key. They still fit, they're just a little harder to use. Where with the pentatonic scale, it's gonna sound good over every single chord. But what I want you to do here is to take that pentatonic scale and add those notes back in. So now we've got And so now we've essentially combined our major scale shape with our minor pentatonic scale. And this is gonna give us our new allowable notes when we're improvising over this song. So instead of being stuck with just that tiny scale shape, you can now play around with these other notes from this other scale. So what you wanna do here is pull up the song or the jam track and basically repeat steps 4 and 5. So what I mean by that is play the root notes from your major scale, and then when you play a random note, feel free to play it from the other notes from that other scale. And then once you feel comfortable with that, you can move on to step 5, where you just have complete freedom and you can just play around with any notes, combining both of those scales together because they're all in a nice, comfortable position. There are so many guitar players that have built entire careers off of just using this one minor pentatonic scale shape. So you'll find that it actually gives you a whole bunch of options. But again, the idea here is to give you the freedom to play whatever you want. Now, once you really get the hang of that new shape, we're gonna add a few more allowable notes to your existing shape. And basically all we have to do for that is we're just adding the rest of our major scale notes to the rest of the scale. So if you remember, we're just adding those 2 notes back in to make it a major scale, right? So we can add notes back into the rest of the scale as well, and that would look like this. And this shape is the main shape that I use when I improvise. So it's gonna cover this much of the fretboard, which I know is not a lot, but it's gonna give you every single note that you're allowed to play from that key of the song we were working on, all the way from our 8th fret to our 12th fret. So you now know every single note that you can play. And if you want to find those root notes of the chords, so the chord tones again, we can find them in these new spots as well. So just so you know the note names here, we have C sharp, D sharp, E, then we go up to F sharp, G sharp, A, then we've got B, C sharp, D sharp, and then back to our E, and then the rest of the scale, which is going to go E to F sharp, to G sharp, to A, B, C sharp, D sharp, and then back to E. And now you can go back to step 4 and 5 again and try it with this final shape. The last thing we're going to talk about in section 2 here is lead guitar techniques. So there are a lot of things that you can do when you're playing to kind of spice things up a little bit, right? If you're just playing static notes, it's not going to sound very exciting. So this is where we add things like bends, slides, even vibrato, double stops, and those are the things that are going to give your solo some flavor. Now, I'm not going to go super in depth on those techniques, but I will kind of give you a place to start. Slides are a really great and easy way to start moving around inside your scale and to get it to stop kind of feeling like a scale or feel so boxy. And all that entails is when you play a note from the scale, is playing it and sliding it up, or playing the note and sliding it down. So the idea here being that you play the note, pick the note before the slide happens. It takes some time to get some accuracy with it. Take it slow. This might not be something you incorporate right away, but it's something you can work your way up to. Bending is another great one. And the idea here is that you kind of want to bend to other notes from the scale. And basically a great way to just start adding bends is just simply with this note right here. So inside of our scale shape. And all you're going to do is bend it to match that note right there. 2 notes above. So it's the same note as this. You can obviously try bending other notes as well. The main thing that I'd recommend here is using these other fingers behind, put them down on the string to kind of reinforce and strengthen this finger right here. So if I were just bending just with the strength of this one finger, it can be kind of hard. So what we like to do instead is put these other fingers behind it and just strengthen our bend a little bit. Vibrato is a really tough one to master, so don't feel like you need to incorporate this one, but if you want, you can start playing around with shaking a note when you land on it. I think it's especially good for highlighting 1 or 2 notes in a phrase rather than every single note you play. So if you play a little lick, you can try shaking things a little bit. My biggest recommendation here is try not to let your vibrato come too much from your fingers pushing up and down, and make it kind of come more from your wrist. It's a bit of a twisting motion. That's going to make it sound much more smooth. The last little technique here is double stops, and double stops are just simply playing 2 notes instead of playing 1 note. So instead of playing just 1 note at a time, you could play 2. And double stops are such a classic part of John Mayer's soloing, so if you are a John Mayer fan, this can be a great technique to start working on, and there's a whole bunch of different directions you can go, but just try adding, sometimes when you're going to play 1 single note, do a little bar, or add an extra finger so that you can play 2. So kind of the final test for this section of this video is to use this new expanded shape that you've learned, and then also start incorporating a few of these techniques as well. Okay, so I want to end off section 2 with one last little thing just about chord tones. Chords have more than just one note. So we've just been focusing on the root note of the chord, but there are other notes inside those chords. So for example, in our E major chord, it's not just an E note, it's also a B note and a G sharp note. Now, if you want to learn more about where these notes come from and things like that, make sure you check out my video on where chords come from, and also my video about triads. It's going to explain things in a little bit more detail. I don't want to get kind of too caught up here. But basically what that means is when you're playing and you're going to land on a chord, you have other options as well. And those notes from those chords, because they exist inside the key, will also exist inside your scale shape. It just comes down to identifying them. Now, obviously, this can take a lot of brain power to really be doing on the fly, so only really start thinking about it if you're really comfortable with what we've been working on so far. All right, so now we've arrived at our second checkpoint of this lesson, and again, this might be a good point for you to stop and save the rest of this video for later. There is so much that you can do with just this one scale shape, some simple techniques, and one song, so please don't feel like you need to rush along to the next thing until you feel like you're really ready. So here we are at the final section of this video where we're going to talk about more songs and playing in different keys. So obviously up until this point, we've only covered one key, and specifically, we've really only covered one song. But what about other songs that are in other keys? How do we deal with those? Well, one of the amazing things about guitar, and this makes it different than something like the piano, is when we want to change keys, the shapes themselves never change. All we have to do is shift what we're doing up or down the fretboard to fit into our new key. And the easiest way to start doing this is by identifying our tonic of the scale. And this is just the root note of the scale. So an E major scale, our tonic would be an E note. Now in our new built out shape, our E note is in a few different spots. It's here, and it's also here, and it's also here. But for the sake of what we're going to do here, I like to think of things along the low E string because it's very easy to memorize. And basically all we have to do is look at that note in the scale. So this one where your pinky lands, when you play this, and it's obviously the same on the high E string, but right there is the root note of this whole scale shape that we're playing. So it is our E note, is right there. Now, if we were to take everything we're doing here and slide it anywhere else and place that pinky and the whole shape in a new position, whatever note that pinky is on right there is the name of the key that we are now in. So for example, this new position that I'm in, this note right here is a B note. And what that would mean is if I play these notes, I would be playing in the key of B major. Now I'm just going to be relating everything to the major key here, but if you want to learn more about the relative major and minor keys that I talked about earlier in this video, make sure you check out my video on minor keys. It explains everything in more depth and how we get our relative major and minor keys. So for example, this key we're in is B major. It's also the same key as G sharp minor. But again, I don't want to get too caught up, so I'll make sure to have that linked in the description below. Now, all this is going to mean is depending on the key of the song that you want to solo along to or improvise along to, you just need to find the right spot on the fretboard where the notes all line up and you're in the same key. Now, I also have a video on how to find the key of a song. So if you listen to a song, you don't know what key it's in, I do have a video that will help you identify that along with the chords that go along with it. So you can check that out as well. But basically the gist of it is that you can move that scale shape around until eventually it fits. It does require some trial and error, but eventually you're going to find a spot where the scale fits and everything sounds good. There is technically only one spot on the fretboard that sounds perfect with every single note. So if it doesn't sound quite right, you're probably in the wrong spot. Now for our next example, we're going to be using a track in the key of G major, and that is the song Gravity by John Mayer. And there's a couple reasons why I like to use this song. First and foremost, it just goes between a G and a C, so a G major and a C major, which is just in the key of G major. So the whole song is, and it's quite long, to our C major. And it just loops that back and forth, and the chord changes take quite a while, so there's tons of space for you to play around with your scales. And to find our scale shape that would fit in this key, we'd be in the key of G major, so we'd find a G major note. Now the problem is that it's going to require you to use a bunch of open strings in this position. Now you can do that, that's perfectly fine. You can play can totally do that. But for the sake of what we're working on in this lesson, I actually want you to go all the way up your fretboard so that we find our G an octave up. And obviously this is our 12th fret, so it repeats the same notes. And then this right here on our 15th fret is going to be a G note. So if we were to just play the scale shape that we learned in section 2 of this video, we would just need to line our pinky up with the G, and we would have. And that's going to give you all of your allowed notes. We call them diatonic notes inside of the key. So all of those notes are going to sound pretty good over top of the chord progression in this song. So now what you want to do is pull up the original song, or I also have a jam track that I've made that just goes from a G major to a C major and just loops for a really long time. You can use that as well. I'll have that linked below, but the original song totally works as well. And you would just repeat steps 4 and 5 from the 5-step method for improvising using your bigger extended shape. And you'll notice, because the chord progression itself and how it operates in the key is quite different, where the other chord progression is a 6-4-1, this one is a 1-2-A-4. The notes are going to interact a little bit differently with the chords that you're playing over. And this might inspire some different ideas. The licks that you played over Slow Dancing in a Burning Room might not sound quite so good over top of Gravity. But the cool thing that you can do now is, now that you know how keys work, is if you had a specific lick you were working on for Slow Dancing in a Burning Room, well, you can transpose that right into this new key for Gravity as well. And I'll just give you a quick little taste of what that jam track sounds like. Now, something this jam track doesn't do that the original song does do is modulate to a different key. So for the most part, Gravity is just sitting in the key of G major, but there's a point in the pre-chorus where it actually modulates to the key of B flat major. So what it does is it goes from a D major chord, which exists inside the key of G major, so it's something that we can play what we're already playing over. Then it goes to a B flat major, and then to an E flat major, and then it goes down to a D7. And when it changes to these chords, so I'll play it for you so you can hear it. What it does when it goes to those really cool sounding chords is the song technically modulates to the key of B flat major. And so what you would do here is you would simply shift that entire shape to B flat major for that section of the song, and then go right back down to the key of G major. And we'd use the exact same method for playing in any other key. So if this here is our G major position, we would just take this pinky and put it on a B flat, which is all the way up here. So we could play it up there, or we could go all the way down back to here. Now, it's not exactly easy to move back and forth between them if you're going to go from here to here, but for the sake of illustration, I'll put it down here. And basically all you would do is, now we're in the key of B flat major. And the idea is that you'd be soloing up here at that point. And the idea is that you'd be soloing up here at that point. And then right when those chords change, and if you wanted to, you could hit that chord change with the rest of the band, and then you'd fall back into G major. And that's how you're going to deal with the majority of modulations like that. Some songs are going to quickly modulate into a different key for a tiny little section. Especially with some older songs, you'll see them just modulate partway through the song. They'll just all of a sudden change into a new key and then finish the song in the new key. But all of them would be approached in the same way. You'd just be moving that new shape that you know into that new key and improvising there. Okay, so that's going to be it for section 3 of this lesson. But I want to talk about where you can go from here. So from this video, I'd actually suggest you first check out my video on chord roadmaps, because that's going to serve as a foundation and a basis for kind of navigating the fretboard and really understanding the key that you're playing in and where the chords come from. And then once you've really got a grasp on that, you can move into part 1 and part 2 of playing riffs and licks between the chords. And that's going to give you a whole bunch more to work with. It's going to help you to really expand out that shape, but it's also going to help you to kind of understand how all this ties in with chords and chord progressions. It's really going to lay some incredible groundwork for you to improve your skills at improvising. Okay, so that was a pretty long one. We packed a lot into this video. Like I said, break it down into sections if that makes it easier for you, but I really hope you got something out of it. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, and please also consider subscribing to the channel as well. I release a new video just like this one every single week. If you do have any questions about anything we covered in this lesson, please make sure you leave them in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.